Hello, English learners. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we have something super exciting lined up, something that can make or break your travel experience. Picture this. You're in a foreign country, trying to communicate in English, and suddenly, a simple phrase you use goes completely wrong. It's awkward, confusing, and frustrating, right? Well, today, we're going to fix that. We'll be talking about the top 10 travel English mistakes that most people make, and trust me, you don't want to miss these. Whether you're traveling for business, adventure, or just a vacation, these tips will help you sound more confident and clear in any situation.
Exactly. And this isn't just about getting the grammar right. It's about real-world, everyday communication. We're talking about the little things, those small mistakes that, if avoided, can make your travel experience so much smoother. Have you ever found yourself struggling to ask for directions? Or ordering something in a restaurant and realizing you said it completely wrong? I've been there, and we want to make sure you never have to feel that way again.
That's right. Travel English is a whole different beast compared to regular conversations. It's fast-paced, it's full of local nuances, and you need to be clear. But the good news is, these mistakes are easy to avoid once you know what to watch out for. And the benefits? Oh, they're huge. By the end of this episode, you'll be able to communicate like a local, avoid those awkward moments, and really enjoy your time abroad without any language barriers holding you back.
So whether you're catching a cab in New York, ordering a coffee in London, or asking for directions in Tokyo, you'll want to stay tuned. Trust us, these 10 mistakes could save you a lot of stress on your next trip. All right, let's get into one of the most common mistakes I see people making when they're traveling. Confusing "do you have" with "can I have." Now, this might sound simple, but it can actually cause some confusion. Think about this. You're at a cafe, and you're hungry. You walk up to the counter and ask, "Do you have a sandwich?" It sounds fine, right? But here's the problem. "Do you have" is actually asking if something is available. It's a question, not a request. So, while the person behind the counter will probably say, "Yes, we have sandwiches," they might not know exactly what you're looking for. You're not really ordering yet. You're just inquiring, and that's where the confusion begins.
Exactly. Now let me explain why this is important. In travel situations, you're not just asking for information, you're making a request. So instead of saying, "Do you have a sandwich?" what you want to say is, "Can I have a sandwich?" This is much more direct and clear. When you say, "Can I have," you're not just asking if it's available, you're asking for it, which makes it sound like you know exactly what you want and you're ready to order. This is especially important when you're in a restaurant or at a cafe because it shows confidence and helps the person you're speaking to understand your request quickly. For example, imagine you're in line at a coffee shop. If you say, "Do you have coffee?" you're asking whether or not coffee is available. But if you say, "Can I have a coffee, please?" you're now making a polite request. It sounds natural and much more respectful. When you're traveling, this is key. It makes your communication smoother and avoids confusion.
Exactly. And this isn't just about being correct in grammar. It's about sounding natural and polite. You want to make sure that people understand you immediately, especially when you're ordering food, asking for directions, or even just requesting help. For example, when you're at a store and you want to know if they have something, you can say, "Do you have a map?" or "Do you have any souvenirs?" That's perfectly fine because you're simply asking for information. But when you're ordering something or making a request, "Can I have" is the better choice. Let me show you with an example. If you're in a restaurant and you're ready to order, saying, "Can I have the chicken soup, please?" is not only polite, it's clear and direct. It's not a question anymore, it's a request. And that's the key difference.
Right. Now, let's talk about why this matters when you're traveling. When you're in a foreign country, sometimes language barriers can already make communication tricky. So, if you're using the wrong phrasing or sounding unsure, it can make things even more difficult. You might get a response like, "Yes, we have sandwiches," and you could end up feeling confused because they don't really understand that you're ready to make an order. But if you use, "Can I have," You're making your intentions clear from the start, and let me tell you, that confidence goes a long way. Not only do you avoid confusion, but you also show respect for the person you're speaking with, and it makes them more likely to help you quickly and efficiently. It's such a simple shift, but it's incredibly effective.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Whether you're ordering food, asking for a drink at a bar, or even just requesting a simple service, using the right phrasing makes a world of difference. When you walk up to the counter and say, "Can I have a sandwich, please?" you're being clear, polite, and respectful. The person behind the counter understands exactly what you want, and you're showing that you know what you're doing. And don't forget, adding that little please at the end really makes the request sound even better. Trust me, it can turn a regular interaction into a much more positive experience. Think of it like this. The person serving you will appreciate the politeness, and it can make the whole exchange smoother.
Right. And let's also consider that travel English isn't just about saying the right words. It's about understanding the cultural context and making sure you communicate in a way that's expected. In many English-speaking countries, especially in customer service situations, being polite is highly valued. So when you say, "Can I have," you're not just making an order. You're showing respect for the person you're talking to. You're not being pushy or demanding. You're simply making a clear and polite request. And it makes you sound more confident too. It's really a small thing that can make a huge difference when you're traveling.
Absolutely. And to summarize, when you're in a situation where you're asking for something specific, whether it's food, a service, or an item at a store, remember to use "can I have." It's the polite, direct, and confident way to request something. However, if you're just asking if something is available, then "do you have" works just fine. And don't forget the power of saying "please." It really does go a long way in making your communication sound more respectful and natural. So, next time you're in line at a cafe or at a store, just remember, if you're making a request, use "can I have," and if you're asking about availability, then go with "do you have." It's all about getting the right phrase for the right situation.
All right, let's talk about one of the most common mistakes when it comes to travel English. It's the confusion between how much and how many. Now, this might seem simple, but it can really trip people up, especially when they're trying to ask for things or find out prices. So, let's make sure we clear this up once and for all. The key thing to remember is that we use how much for uncountable nouns and how many for countable nouns. So, if you're asking about something that you can't count in individual pieces, like water or rice, you'll use how much. But if you're asking about things you can count one by one, like apples or books, you'll use how many. Pretty simple, right?
Exactly. And once you get the hang of this, it's really easy to use correctly. Let's break it down a bit more. For example, if you're asking about fruit, like apples, you would say, "How many apples do I need?" Because apples are countable. You can easily count them one by one. But if you're talking about something like rice or water, you'd say, "How much rice do I need?" Or, "How much water is in this bottle?" Because these are uncountable. You can't count rice one grain at a time or water in individual drops. It's just a quantity, not a thing you count individually. So, you see the difference? If you can count it, use how many. If you can't count it, use how much. It's that easy.
Exactly, Sophia. And this mistake happens a lot when people are trying to buy things. For example, if you're at a market, you might want to ask, "How much apples are these?" But that's not correct. You should say, "How many apples do I need?" because apples are countable. On the other hand, if you're buying something like rice or even coffee, you'd ask, "How much rice should I buy?" or "How much coffee do you want?" because those are uncountable. The important thing is to remember that with uncountable nouns, you're talking about a mass or a substance that you can't divide up into individual pieces. For countable nouns like sandwiches or tickets, you can count them one by one, so you use how many.
Exactly. And this is super helpful when you're traveling. You're going to be asking about things like how much a meal costs or how many tickets you need for an event. For example, if you're at a cafe, you would ask, "How much is a sandwich?" Because a sandwich is a thing you can buy as a whole. But if you were asking about how many sandwiches you wanted to buy, you'd say, "How many sandwiches should I get?" You see the difference? And don't forget, even when you're asking about the price of something, you'll always use how much, even if the thing is countable, like a ticket or a sandwich. You always use how much to talk about prices.
Right. That's key. So when it comes to prices, you'll say, "How much is this?" or "How much are the tickets?" But when you're talking about quantities of things, you use how many for countable items and how much for uncountable items. I think the big takeaway here is that once you understand the rule, it gets much easier to ask the right questions while you're traveling. And by using the correct phrase, you'll sound more confident and be able to communicate clearly with people.
Yes, absolutely. And even though it seems simple, it's really helpful to get this right, especially in situations where you're in a new country or trying to navigate unfamiliar places. Knowing when to use how much and how many will make a huge difference in how easily you can get what you need.
Exactly. So to quickly summarize, how much is for uncountable nouns like water, rice, or money. How many is for countable nouns like apples, books, or tickets. And when you're asking about prices, no matter if it's countable or not, you always use how much. So, next time you're at a store or market and you want to ask about something, you'll know exactly which phrase to use. And that's going to make your travel experience a whole lot smoother.
All right, let's move on to a mistake that may sound small, but it happens a lot, especially when you're learning English. It's the error of saying "I am agree" instead of just saying "I agree." Now you might be thinking, what's the big deal? Well, it actually is a big deal in English. The thing is, in English, we don't need to use the verb am when we want to say agree. We simply say, "I agree," not "I am agree." I know this might sound a little confusing, but trust me, once you understand why this happens, you'll be able to fix it easily.
Exactly, Sophia. So let's break this down. In English, agree is what we call a stative verb. Stative verbs describe states or conditions, and we don't need to use am, is, or are with them. That's why we say "I agree" instead of "I am agree." The same goes for other stative verbs like believe, understand, or like. For example, you would say, "I like pizza," not "I am like pizza." You wouldn't say, "I am understand." You would say, "I understand." It's just the way these verbs work in English. So when you say "I am agree," it sounds unnatural because you're adding an extra verb that isn't needed. The correct phrase is simply "I agree."
Right, Adam. And you might also hear people make this mistake when they're trying to talk about actions, like saying, "I am agreeing." But here's the thing. "I am agreeing" is actually a correct sentence too, but it has a different meaning. "I am agreeing" is in the present continuous tense, which is used when you're talking about an action that's happening right now, at the moment. For example, if you're in a conversation and someone is explaining something and you're agreeing with them as they speak, you might say, "I am agreeing with you right now." So, "I am agreeing" is okay when you're talking about the action in progress, but "I agree" is used when you're just expressing your opinion in general.
Exactly. "I agree" is simple and clear. It's used when you want to express your agreement with something, whether you're responding to a suggestion, statement, or idea. But if you're talking about agreeing in the moment, that's when "I am agreeing" would be used. For example, if you're in the middle of a discussion with someone and you're nodding along as they speak, you could say, "I am agreeing with you right now," but "I agree" is the more common, simple way to say you agree with something.
Here's a little trick to remember. Just think of the verb agree like other stative verbs. You don't need am or are in front of them. You wouldn't say, "I am no" or "I am love," right? So when you want to express agreement, just say "I agree." It's that simple. I am agree sounds wrong to native speakers because it's adding something unnecessary. It's just, I agree, and that's all you need.
That's a great tip, Sophia. And I think the key thing here is that in English, we don't use am or is with stative verbs like agree. We keep it simple. So, to sum up, just remember this. When you want to say that you agree with something, always say, I agree. That's it. You don't need am in there. And if you're talking about agreeing in the moment, you can use I am agreeing. But keep in mind that's more for describing an action in progress, not just an opinion.
Exactly. The more you practice using I agree, the more natural it will feel. And don't worry if you make this mistake at first. It's very common, and it's easy to fix. Just keep practicing, and soon you'll find that saying I agree becomes second nature. Adam. So, to wrap up this chapter, remember, use I agree to express your agreement, and save I am agreeing for when you want to describe an action happening right now. It's all about knowing when to use the right form of the verb.
All right. Let's dive into another mistake many English learners make when they're trying to ask for something. It's overusing the word can. Now, don't get me wrong, can is useful, but a lot of learners think it's the only way to ask for things. And while it's okay to use can, it's not always the most polite or appropriate choice, especially if you're in a more formal setting or asking for something in a polite way. So let's break it down. When you use can, it's a direct and straightforward way to ask for something. But in English, there are a lot of other ways to ask for things that sound a little more polite and respectful. For example, could you or would you mind are both more polite alternatives.
Exactly, Adam. And I think the main reason people overuse can is because they're used to hearing it in everyday situations. You might hear someone say, "Can I get a taxi?" when they're at a hotel or a restaurant, and it sounds fine in a casual situation. But when you're making a request, "Can I get a taxi?" is kind of blunt. It's not rude, but it's not as polite as it could be, especially if you're talking to someone you don't know very well or you're in a formal setting. A better way to ask would be, "Could you call a taxi for me?" Or, "Would you mind calling a taxi for me?" These alternatives are much softer and sound more polite. Could you is a bit more formal than can, and would you mind adds an extra level of politeness because it's like you're asking if it's okay for the other person to do something for you.
Right. And could you and would you mind both give the listener more flexibility? You're not demanding anything. You're politely asking if they are able to help or if they would be willing to help. For example, instead of saying, "Can I get a taxi?" you could say, "Could you call a taxi for me?" Or, "Would you mind calling a taxi for me?" This makes it sound much more polite, and the person you're speaking to will appreciate your respectful tone. Another polite way to make a request is to say, "I was wondering if you could..." For example, you could say, "I was wondering if you could recommend a good restaurant around here." This sounds very polite and is a great way to ask for something when you're not sure if it's appropriate to make a direct request.
I love that example, Adam. I was wondering if you could is perfect for making requests when you want to sound polite but not too pushy. And notice how it softens the request. It's like you're opening up a conversation rather than just jumping straight into the question. Let's say you're at a hotel and you want to ask for something like a wake-up call or extra towels. Instead of saying, "Can I get extra towels?" which sounds a little too direct, you could say, "Could you bring me some extra towels, please?" Or, "Would you mind bringing me extra towels?" You're still making the request, but you're doing it in a way that shows respect for the other person's time and effort.
Exactly, Sophia. And these small changes in how you phrase your requests can really help you sound more polite and professional, especially when you're traveling. The last thing you want is to come across as rude or demanding, even if you don't mean to. And the good news is, once you get into the habit of using these more polite alternatives, it'll feel natural, and you'll get better responses from the people you're asking. Could you, would you mind, and I was wondering if you could, are all fantastic ways to make polite requests. The best part is, they work in almost any situation, whether you're at a restaurant, asking for directions, or talking to hotel staff.
Exactly. And remember, when you use these alternatives, it shows that you're being considerate of the other person's time and effort. That's especially important when you're in a new country and trying to make a good impression. Using could you or would you mind is a simple way to ensure you're speaking respectfully, which goes a long way in building positive relationships while you travel.
So to wrap it up, let's quickly review. Can is fine, but it's not the most polite or formal way to make a request. Instead, try using could you, would you mind, or I was wondering if you could. These phrases will help you sound much more polite, respectful, and thoughtful. So, next time you're making a request, try using one of these alternatives and notice how people respond. It's a small change that can make a big difference. All right, let's move on to a very common mistake that many English learners make, especially when they're traveling: mispronouncing place names. It might seem like a small thing, but it can really affect how well you're understood, and it can also cause confusion when you're trying to get directions or talk about places with locals.
Exactly. Mispronouncing place names is a big deal. In some cases, you might be saying something that's completely different from what you mean, or it might even sound funny to native speakers. But don't worry, it's something we can fix with a little bit of practice and awareness. The thing is, place names don't always follow the same rules as normal words. In English, we sometimes pronounce place names in very unexpected ways. For example, the city of Leicester in England, many people might think it's pronounced Leicester, but the correct pronunciation is actually Leicester. And then there's Worcester. It's not Worcester, but Worcester. These are just a few examples of how place names can trick us.
Right. And these types of mispronunciations happen a lot with names of cities, towns, and even countries. Another example is the city of Paris. A lot of learners mistakenly say Paris, pronouncing it like two separate syllables. But the correct pronunciation is Paris, just one syllable, with a little emphasis on the A sound. You might also encounter cities like Athens, where learners might say Athens like it's two parts, but the correct way to say it is just Athens, with a soft A sound and the T like a soft th sound. It sounds very different from the way we might read the word in English.
Exactly. And it's important to note that mispronunciations like this can be embarrassing if you're trying to ask for directions or talk to locals. Imagine you're in the city of Cairo in Egypt, and you're asking for directions, but you pronounce it like Cairo instead of Cairo. People might not even know what you're talking about. The goal is to sound as close as possible to the correct pronunciation so that communication is smooth. Another tricky one is Rome. A lot of learners will say Rome, which sounds just like the verb to roam, but the proper pronunciation is just Rome, with a short, flat O sound, not Rome. You might not think that's a big deal, but when you're asking for directions or talking about the place, it could cause confusion.
Right. And this is where learning the pronunciation of place names becomes really important. It's not just about sounding good, it's about being understood. If you're traveling to a new place, knowing how to pronounce the name correctly can make things easier. It shows respect for the local culture and language too.
Exactly. And I know it can be hard to remember these tricky names, especially because we don't always pronounce place names the way they're written. So, here's a great tip. When you're planning a trip to a new country or city, take some time to listen to how locals pronounce the names. You can find these pronunciation examples in videos, online travel guides, or even on language apps. Listening to native speakers is one of the best ways to learn the correct pronunciation.
Absolutely. That's a great tip, Sophia. And another way to improve is by practicing saying the place names out loud. Sometimes you just need to repeat the name a few times until it feels natural. Plus, when you practice, you can also use the correct intonation, like in Tokyo. It's not Tokyo, but Tokyo. It's all about making the pronunciation smoother and more like how locals would say it.
Another tip I would suggest is to focus on place names that you'll actually use during your travels. So if you're going to Paris, for example, learn how to say Paris correctly and practice saying it before you go. This way, When you arrive, you'll be confident and clear when talking to locals. The same goes for places like Barcelona. In Spanish, it's pronounced Barcelona with a soft th sound in the middle. It's different from how you might think it's pronounced in English.
Yes, and sometimes you'll find that locals might help you out if you're not getting the pronunciation quite right, but it's always best to try and get it right yourself. They'll appreciate the effort, and it'll definitely help you get around more easily. Just remember, Cairo is Cairo, Paris is Paris, Leicester is Leicester, and Athens is Athens. Practicing these small differences makes a big difference in your travel experience.
Exactly, Adam. And one more thing to keep in mind is that place names are often very specific to a region. So, if you get a chance, ask a local about the pronunciation. They might even tell you little nuances about the local dialect or accent that will help you improve.
So, to summarize, when you're traveling, try to take the time to learn how to pronounce place names correctly. It might seem like a small thing, but it can really help you feel more confident and help others understand you better. And the more you practice, the easier it will get. All right, let's move on to another important one. The phrases, "I'm sorry" and "excuse me." These two phrases are commonly used in English, but many learners make mistakes when they're not sure when to use each one. They might mix them up or use them in the wrong situations. So, let's talk about the right way to use each one and why it matters. All right, let's move on to another important one. The phrases, "I'm sorry" and "excuse me." These two phrases are commonly used in English, but many learners make mistakes when they're not sure when to use each one. They might mix them up or use them in the wrong situations. So, let's talk about the right way to use each one and why it matters. That's a great explanation, Sophia. So let's start with, "I'm sorry." This is the phrase you use when you've made a mistake, or if you're apologizing for something you've done. For example, if you accidentally bump into someone on the street, you should say, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bump into you." You're apologizing because you caused an inconvenience or hurt someone, even if it was unintentional.
Exactly. Another example could be if you're late for an appointment and you need to apologize, you'd say, "I'm sorry I'm late." You're acknowledging that you've done something wrong or caused a problem, and you're expressing regret. It's an important phrase to use when you want to show that you care about the impact of your actions on others.
Right. Now, "excuse me" is used for a very different purpose. You would say "excuse me" when you need to politely get someone's attention, or when you want to pass by someone in a crowded space. For instance, if you're in a busy street or a crowded store and you need to get through, you might say, "Excuse me, could I get by?" Or, "Excuse me, may I pass?" It's a way to politely ask for permission to move or interrupt someone's space.
Exactly. Another common situation where you would use "excuse me" is when you need to ask someone for help. For example, if you're lost and need directions, you would approach someone and say, "Excuse me, could you help me?" It's much more polite than just shouting or walking up to someone without acknowledging them. Using "excuse me" is a great way to start any conversation where you need someone's attention or assistance.
Yes, and remember, "excuse me" is not an apology. It's more about being polite and respectful. So, if you accidentally bump into someone, you would say, "I'm sorry." But if you're trying to get their attention in a crowd or ask a question, "excuse me" is the correct phrase. For example, if you're in a store and want to ask an employee about a product, you would say, "Excuse me, where can I find the coffee?" You wouldn't say, "I'm sorry, where is the coffee?" because that sounds like you've done something wrong.
That's such a good point. And here's another situation where this comes up. Let's say you're in a restaurant and you need to ask the waiter for something. If you say, "Excuse me, could I get the check, please?" It's polite and appropriate, but if you said, "I'm sorry, could I get the check?" it sounds like you're apologizing for asking for the bill. In this case, "excuse me" is the better choice because you're not apologizing for asking for something. It's just a polite request.
Exactly. And one final tip. The tone you use with these phrases also matters. "I'm sorry" should be sincere, like when you really feel bad for something you've done. And excuse me should sound polite, but not overly formal. You're not begging for attention, just politely asking to be acknowledged.
Yes. And it's important to keep in mind that using I'm sorry too often in situations where it's not needed can make you seem overly apologetic. You don't need to say I'm sorry every time you ask for something or need someone's attention. Just save it for situations where it's really necessary.
That's a great point, Sophia. Overusing I'm sorry in places where excuse me would be better could confuse the other person. So remember, I'm sorry is for apologies, when you've made a mistake or need to express regret, and excuse me is for getting someone's attention or moving through a crowd.
Exactly. So next time you're in a situation where you need to ask for help or get someone's attention, remember to use excuse me and save I'm sorry for when you've made a mistake or caused some inconvenience. These small differences can really make a difference in how polite and clear you sound. All right. Now let's dive into a topic that can confuse many learners of English: the difference between take and bring. These two words are often used interchangeably by mistake, but there's actually a very important difference between them. And once you understand it, you'll be able to speak much more clearly and accurately when you're talking about moving things around. The key to understanding these two words comes down to perspective. In other words, it's about who is moving the object and where the object is going. Now, I know this may sound a bit confusing at first, but let me explain it with some examples to make it clearer.
That's right, Sophia. The mistake many learners make is thinking take and bring are pretty much the same. But in fact, they refer to the direction of movement, not just the action of moving something. Take is used when something is being moved away from you, from your current location. On the other hand, bring is used when something is being moved toward you, towards your current location. So when you say take, you're talking about movement away from you. And when you say bring, the movement is happening toward you.
Exactly. So let's start with take. If you ask someone to take something, you're asking them to move it away from you. For example, imagine you're in a room and you need to send a box to another room. You'd say, take the box to the other room. You're giving the instruction to move the box away from you and towards another place. This is where the difference in perspective comes in. You're not moving the object toward yourself. You're sending it somewhere else. So, whenever you're the one moving something away from your current position, you should use take.
Exactly. And that's a great example, Sophia. Another example could be if you're traveling and you need someone to move your luggage. If you're leaving the house and going to the car, you would say, take the suitcase to the car. You're telling someone to move the suitcase away from you and towards the car. The suitcase is moving away from you to a different location. So, whenever you're giving an instruction that involves sending something somewhere else, always use take.
Right. Now, let's look at bring. The opposite of take is bring, and you use it when you want someone to move something toward you or bring it closer to where you are. So, let's say you're sitting in a room and you want your friend to bring you your phone. You would say, bring me my phone. You're asking them to move the phone toward you from wherever it is to where you are right now. It's a small but really important distinction. Bring is all about something moving closer to you.
Exactly. So if you're at home and you want someone to move something closer to you, you'd say, bring the book to me. You're requesting for the book to be moved toward you. And think about it like this. Whenever you are asking for something to come closer to your location, bring is the verb you should use. It's as simple as that. If you need the object to come to you, you bring it. But if it's going away from you, you take it.
Yes, and this becomes especially important when you're traveling or when you're in a situation where there are a lot of objects involved. Let's say you're at a hotel and you need something from the front desk. You would ask them to bring something to your room. For example, if you need more towels, you could say, can you bring me more towels? You're asking for the towels to be brought to you, which is the key difference. In this case, bring is the right choice because the towels are coming toward you.
Right, Sophia. And if you were asking for someone to move something away from you, you would use take. For example, If you're in a restaurant and you want the waiter to take your plate away after you're done eating, you would say, "Could you take my plate?" You're asking them to remove the plate from you, away from your table, and to take it somewhere else, maybe to the kitchen. So the key here is whether the movement is away from you or toward you. If it's away, use take. If it's coming toward you, use bring.
That's a perfect explanation. And don't forget, it's also helpful to think of it like this. Take is when you're sending something away from your current place. For example, take this letter to the post office. You're sending it from where you are to another location. Meanwhile, bring is when you're getting something closer to where you are, like bring me that pen. It's a bit like giving directions. You wouldn't say take me the pen, because the pen is moving toward you, so keeping the direction in mind really helps you choose the right word.
Exactly, Sophia. And once you get the hang of this perspective trick, it becomes much easier to choose between take and bring without thinking too much about it. The direction of movement is what really guides you. It's also worth mentioning that in some situations, especially when you're traveling or in a busy place, mixing up these two words could lead to confusion. So, taking a moment to think about the direction of movement can help you sound more natural and make sure you're understood clearly.
Absolutely. And the more you practice, the more natural it will feel to use take and bring correctly. Just remember, take means to move something away from you, and bring means to move something toward you. With that simple rule in mind, you'll be able to navigate through these phrases with no problem.
Now let's talk about something that a lot of English learners do, using the word very all the time. It's a quick and easy way to emphasize adjectives, but here's the thing. Using very with every adjective can make your English sound a little repetitive and not as natural as it could be. While very is useful, it can often be overused, and in many cases, there are better ways to express intensity or emphasis. So today, we'll look at some alternatives to very that will make your English sound more advanced and varied.
That's such a good point, Adam. Using very constantly is a common mistake because it feels like an easy way to give more emphasis to your words. But the truth is, there are many other words that can express the same level of intensity, and sometimes even more accurately. For example, instead of saying very beautiful, you could say extremely beautiful or incredibly beautiful. These words not only make your sentence sound more interesting, but they also help you convey a stronger sense of how beautiful something really is. So, let's break it down with some examples.
Exactly. Let's look at this example. The view is very beautiful. Now, instead of saying very beautiful, we could say extremely beautiful. Extremely adds an extra layer of intensity, making it sound more impressive. You could also use incredibly beautiful. This gives a similar feeling but sounds a little more dramatic, as if the beauty of the view is beyond what you expected.
Right. And it's not just about very being overused. It's also about choosing words that match the intensity you're trying to express. If you want to say that something is a bit strong but not too extreme, you can use quite. For example, instead of saying very good, you could say quite good. This doesn't make it sound like you're over the top, but it still gives the impression that something is more than just okay. It's a little more reserved, but still positive.
I love that point, Sophia. Quite is a great word to use when you don't want to be too strong, but still want to give something a bit of emphasis. You can also use a bit when you want to say something is somewhat true, but not too intense. For example, instead of very tired, you could say a bit tired. This makes the statement more moderate, and it's a good way to show that you're not completely exhausted, but you're still feeling it a little bit.
Exactly. A bit is perfect for those situations when you don't want to exaggerate too much. Now let's take a look at another example. If you're describing a place, instead of saying very hot, you could say extremely hot or incredibly hot. Both of these sound much stronger than just very hot. But let's say the place isn't too hot but still warm. You could say it's quite hot. That's a much more balanced way to describe the temperature without sounding too intense.
That's a great point. And by using these alternatives, you not only avoid overusing very, but you also make your speech sound more natural and less repetitive. Instead of always relying on very, it's helpful to think about how much emphasis you really need and choose a word that fits the level of intensity you want to express. For example, very tired could become extremely tired if you're completely exhausted, or a bit tired if you're only slightly tired. It's about finding the right balance for what you want to say.
Exactly. And by mixing up your vocabulary, you'll not only sound more advanced, but your listeners will also find your English more interesting and dynamic. So, let's review a few alternatives that we've mentioned today. Instead of saying very beautiful, you could say extremely beautiful or incredibly beautiful. Instead of very good, try saying quite good if you want to soften the emphasis. And for more moderate feelings like being a little tired, you can say a bit tired. It's all about choosing the right word for the situation.
Exactly, Sophia. And just like we've been discussing, the key is to match the intensity of your adjective with the situation. Very can be useful, but there are so many other words that will make your speech sound more natural and sophisticated. So next time you're about to say very, pause and think if there's a better alternative. You'll be surprised how many options you have.
Now, let's look at a mistake that many English learners make when they're trying to ask about the location of something. You might hear people say, "Where is it near?" But that's actually not the right way to ask. When you want to know what a place or building is close to, the correct phrase is, "What is it near?" It's a subtle difference, but it's really important. So, let's explore why this mistake happens and how you can fix it.
Exactly, Sophia. When you're asking about locations or places, it's natural to want to know what's nearby. But instead of saying, "Where is it near?" you need to use, "What is it near?" It's because you're asking for specific landmarks, buildings, or places that the location is close to, not asking where the nearby area is. Think of it like this. When you ask, "What is it near?" you're asking for the name of the places around it. You're looking for information about the location in relation to its surroundings.
Right. Let's look at a practical example. Imagine you're staying at a hotel and you're wondering what it's close to. Instead of asking, "Where is the hotel near?" you should ask, "What is the hotel near?" In this case, you're asking for landmarks or notable places that are close to the hotel, like restaurants, parks, or maybe a famous museum. So you could be asking, "What is the hotel near?" And the answer could be, "The hotel is near a shopping mall and a park." You're interested in what's around it, not asking where it's located in relation to the surroundings.
Exactly. Now, let's break it down a bit. The confusion here usually comes from the use of where. Where is used when you're asking for the exact location of something, like, "Where is the hotel?" You're asking for the specific address or place of the hotel. But when you're asking about the nearby places or landmarks, you need to use, "What is it near?" because you're looking for information about its proximity to other places, not its exact position.
Exactly, Adam. And remember, the mistake of saying "where is it near" might sound understandable at first, but it actually doesn't make sense in English. "What is it near?" is asking about the things that are nearby, so it's the more natural and grammatically correct choice. Imagine you're in a new city and you're asking about a restaurant. Instead of saying, "Where is the restaurant near?" you would ask, "What is the restaurant near?" This helps you find out what attractions, other restaurants, or public transport options are nearby.
Yes, and you can also ask this when you're trying to find a good place to go or to visit. If you're in a city and want to visit something famous, you could ask someone, "What is the museum near?" The person might respond, "It's near the train station and a big shopping mall." This makes your question more clear and precise, helping you understand the context of the location.
Exactly. And this is such an easy fix, but it's one of those things that can make a big difference when speaking naturally. By using "what is it near" instead of "where is it near," you will sound much more fluent and precise. It's a small change, but it makes a big impact on your communication. It's also good to remember that where is typically used for asking about specific places, and what is used when you're asking about something's surrounding areas.
That's right, Sophia. Another great thing about using what is it near is that it's a more general way of asking for surrounding locations. It's not just limited to landmarks either. You could ask about the proximity to anything, like, what is the airport near? You might hear someone say, it's near the city center and the convention center. So you're getting a bigger picture of what's around that location.
Exactly. And now that we've explained it, let's do a quick recap. When you want to know the things or places a location is close to, use what is it near. For example, what is the restaurant near? You're asking about nearby landmarks or attractions. And remember, don't use where is it near, because it doesn't sound natural in English. It's not about asking the where of nearby places, it's about asking what those places are.
All right, we've covered some really important mistakes today, but for our last one, we're going to talk about something that many English learners tend to overuse. I don't understand. It's a very common phrase, and it's definitely useful in situations where you're having trouble understanding something. But, and here's the problem, using I don't understand all the time can actually make it sound like you're struggling a lot. There are actually better alternatives that sound a bit more polite and helpful in those moments. So today, let's explore how you can avoid overusing I don't understand and still communicate clearly and confidently.
Yes, Adam. I completely agree. I don't understand is a phrase that works, but using it too much can make you sound stuck or frustrated. It's important to know that there are other, more polite and specific ways to ask for help or clarification in English. For example, instead of just saying I don't understand, you could say, could you explain that again? Or could you say that in a different way? These alternatives not only sound more polite, but also give the other person a clearer idea of what exactly you need help with. Let's dive into some more examples.
That's a great point, Sophia. When you just say I don't understand, it's a bit general. The other person might not know what part of the conversation is confusing for you. But by using phrases like, could you explain that again? You're asking for a clear explanation without sounding too negative or frustrated. It's a more constructive way to communicate that you're having trouble following along. So let's say someone is explaining directions to you, and you're not quite sure what they mean. Instead of just saying, I don't understand, you could say, could you explain that again? That gives the person a chance to give you more details or clarify what they meant.
Exactly. And sometimes it's not just about not understanding the whole idea, but maybe it's just one part of it. In that case, instead of saying I don't understand, you could say something like, can you speak slower? Or could you repeat that part? These alternatives are especially helpful when you're trying to understand fast speech or complex sentences. It's a polite way to ask someone to slow down or clarify a specific point. So, for example, if you're in a conversation and the person is speaking too fast, you could say, can you speak slower? This sounds much more helpful than simply saying I don't understand. It's giving you more control over how to receive the information.
Exactly, and I think it's important to remember that when you're in a conversation and you don't understand something, you don't always have to feel embarrassed or frustrated. English speakers are usually more than happy to help, especially if you ask in a polite and clear way. Saying something like, can you speak slower? Or, could you explain that again? Not only helps you understand better, but also shows that you're engaged in the conversation and that you want to improve.
Right. And there are also phrases like, I'm not sure I follow, or I didn't catch that. These are very useful alternatives that sound natural and polite. If someone says something that's a bit complicated or too fast, instead of immediately saying I don't understand, you can say I didn't catch that, or I'm not sure I follow. These are great ways to communicate that you're not clear on something, without making the situation feel tense or awkward.
Exactly, Sophia. I didn't catch that is a very common and casual way to ask for repetition, and it's great because it sounds like you just missed a small detail rather than not understanding everything. It's less about saying you don't understand and more about asking for a little bit of clarification. And I'm not sure I follow is another one that's a bit more neutral. It's like saying, I'm not completely sure I get the point yet, which is much more specific than just saying, I don't understand. These phrases help you engage in the conversation more actively.
I love those examples, Adam. And remember, it's also helpful to be honest about what you don't understand. If you're unsure about something specific, feel free to ask for clarification on that part. Instead of just saying, I don't understand, you could say, could you clarify what you mean by that? Or, what do you mean by specific word or phrase? This shows the other person exactly what you're confused about and gives them the opportunity to explain it in more detail.
Yes, that's such a good point, Sophia. By focusing on the specific part that's unclear, you're making it easier for the other person to help you. They know exactly what to explain again, or in a different way. This way, you're not just left with a general sense of confusion, but you're getting the help you need for the exact part of the conversation you didn't quite get.
Exactly. So let's review a few of these alternatives. Instead of saying, I don't understand, you can say, could you explain that again? Can you speak slower? I didn't catch that. What do you mean by word, phrase? Could you repeat that part? I'm not sure I follow. All of these phrases sound more natural, more polite, and will help you get the information you need in a more constructive way.
That's a perfect summary, Sophia. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where you're not fully understanding something, try one of these alternatives instead of immediately going to, I don't understand. It's all about asking for the specific help you need while staying polite and engaged. And remember, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. It's part of learning, and it's something every English learner experiences. That's a wrap on today's episode. We hope these tips help you avoid common travel English mistakes and boost your confidence while exploring the world.
Remember, mistakes are part of learning. Just keep practicing and enjoy the journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more practical English tips.
We'd love to hear from you. Share your travel stories or questions with us. Until next time, keep learning and traveling. Thank you.